I stayed. Not because it was easy. Not because I was strong. Not because I knew what I was doing. I stayed because I didn't know how to leave. Because leaving meant forgetting. And forgetting felt worse than silence. I stayed in the room where the light didn't change. Where the walls didn't speak. Where the air was thick with memory. I stayed when the voices stopped. When the rhythm broke. When the world outside kept moving. And I couldn't. I stayed for no one. Not for them. Not for you. Not even for me. I stayed because something held me. Not a hand. Not a promise. Just a weight. A quiet gravity. I stayed when the silence grew teeth. When it bit into my mornings. When it chewed through my sleep. When it whispered things I didn't want to hear. I stayed when the mirror stopped recognizing me. When my face became a stranger. When my voice sounded borrowed. I stayed when the memories blurred. When names faded. When places collapsed into fog. I stayed when I stopped asking questions. When I stopped answering them. When I stopped needing them. I stayed when the world forgot me. And I let it. I stayed because staying was all I had. Because movement felt like betrayal. Because change felt like abandonment. I stayed in the rhythm of stillness. In the breath between thoughts. In the pause between heartbeats. I stayed in the shape of someone I used to be. Not out of loyalty. Not out of hope. But out of inertia. I stayed when the silence became a language. When it spoke in shadows. In echoes. In the way the light bent around my body. I stayed when I stopped believing in rescue. When I stopped waiting for someone to knock. When I stopped hoping for a message. I stayed when the silence became company. When it sat beside me. When it listened. When it didn't ask me to explain. I stayed when I realized. That staying wasn't strength. It was surrender. But not defeat. I stayed because I needed to. Because I wasn't ready to become someone else. Because I wasn't ready to let go of the version of me that knew how to wait. I stayed when the seasons changed. And I didn't. When the trees shed their leaves. And I kept mine. When the wind moved. And I stayed still. I stayed when the silence became a mirror. When it showed me things I didn't want to see. When it reflected not who I was, but who I had become. I stayed when the silence became a sculptor. When it carved me. Softly. Sharply. Without asking. I stayed when I realized. That staying was not the absence of movement, but the presence of transformation. I stayed. And I changed. But that's another story. It didn't break me. Not like glass. Not like bone. It bent me. Slowly. Quietly. Like wind bends branches that don't know they're bending. I stayed. But something inside me began to drift. Not away. Just sideways. Out of alignment. Out of rhythm. I used to speak with certainty. Now I speak in echoes. In half-formed thoughts. In pauses that last longer than they should. I used to remember clearly. Now memory feels like mist. I reach for names. And find textures. I reach for moments. And find shadows. The silence didn't ask. It entered. Unannounced. Unapologetic. It sat beside me. And began its work. Not with force. But with patience. Not with noise. But with presence. It rearranged me. Not all at once. But piece by piece. My voice changed. My breath changed. The way I looked at the door changed. I stopped waiting. Not because I gave up. But because I understood. No one was coming. And maybe that was okay. I stopped pretending I was whole. Stopped pretending I was untouched. Stopped pretending I was still the person who walked in here. I started listening. Not to words. But to the space between them. To the way silence hums. When you let it. It taught me things I didn't know I needed. How to sit still. Without apology. How to feel. Without explanation. How to exist. Without performance. I stayed. But the staying changed. It became less about holding on, and more about letting go. Letting go of the version of me that needed answers, that needed rescue, that needed to be seen, to feel real. I stayed, but I softened, not into weakness, into truth. The silence became a mirror, showed me not who I was, but who I had become. And I didn't look away. I stayed, and I saw myself, bent, blurred, but still here, still breathing, still listening, still becoming. The shift wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like a tide that moves the shore, grain by grain. But one day, I looked up, and the landscape was different. I was different. I stayed, but I changed, and the shift was the beginning. I'm not who I was, and I don't say that with regret. I say it with recognition, with clarity, with a kind of quiet pride. Because staying didn't preserve me. It transformed me. I used to think that survival meant sameness, that if I could hold on to the way I used to speak, the way I used to feel, the way I used to hope, then I'd be okay. But I was wrong. I stayed, and in staying, I became someone else. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but inevitably. I'm not who I was when I first sat in this silence, when I first chose not to run, when I first whispered, "I'll wait." That version of me was softer, more afraid, more willing to bend for the sake of comfort. This version of me is quieter, but sharper, more deliberate, more honest. I used to fill the silence with explanations. Now I let it speak. I used to chase meaning. Now I let it arrive when it's ready. I used to need to be understood. Now I need to be real. I'm not who I was, and I don't mourn that, because the person I was couldn't have survived this, couldn't have sat in this stillness without breaking. The person I was needed noise, needed validation, needed mirrors. This version of me needs breath, needs rhythm, needs truth. I'm not who I was when I believed that staying meant waiting. Now I know that staying means becoming. Becoming someone who doesn't need to be rescued, who doesn't need to be explained, who doesn't need to be seen, to feel real. I'm not who I was when I feared silence. Now I walk with it, sit with it, let it shape me. I'm not who I was when I thought presence meant permanence. Now I know presence means change. To stay is to shift, to soften, to evolve. I'm not who I was when I thought I had to hold on to every version of myself to be whole. Now I know wholeness is fluid. It moves, it breathes, it breaks, and rebuilds. I'm not who I was, and maybe that's the point, because the silence didn't just surround me. It entered me. It rewrote me. It gave me a new language, a language of stillness, of breath, of becoming. I'm not who I was, and I'm still becoming, still shifting, still listening, still staying, not as I was, but as I am, and that is enough. I didn't fight it. Not anymore. Not after the shift. Not after the cracks. Not after I saw myself and didn't recognize the shape. I didn't fight the silence. I let it in. Let it settle. Let it speak. I didn't fight the change. I let it happen. Let it unfold. Let it become me. Acceptance wasn't a decision. It was a moment, a breath, pause, where resistance fell away. And I simply was. I stopped asking why I stayed. Stopped asking what I was waiting for. Stopped asking who I used to be. I started asking what I needed now, what I could carry, what I could leave behind. I accepted that I was no longer whole in the way I used to define it. I accepted that healing doesn't mean returning. It means continuing. I accepted. That silence isn't empty. It's full. Full of echoes. Full of memory. Full of possibility. I accepted that I had changed. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Because staying meant becoming. I accepted that the person I was is gone. And that's okay. Not lost. Just completed. Like a chapter. Like a season. Like a version. That served its purpose. I accepted that grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's still. Sometimes it's the way you breathe when no one's watching. I accepted that I don't need to explain. Not to others. Not to myself. I accepted that presence is enough. That being here is enough. That becoming is enough. I accepted that I am not waiting anymore. Not for rescue. Not for recognition. Not for return. I accepted that I am here. Changed. Softened. Sharpened. Still. I accepted that silence is not the enemy. It's the environment. It's the space where I learned to listen, to feel, to breathe. I accepted that I am not who I was, and I don't need to be. I accepted that I am not finished, and I don't need to be. I accepted that I am not broken, just different, and in that difference, there is strength, there is truth, there is beauty. I accepted that staying was never about holding on. It was about letting go, in a way that felt like staying. I accepted that I am still becoming, still shifting, still listening, and that is enough. I walk differently now. Not heavier, not lighter, just quieter. My steps don't echo the way they used to. They don't ask for attention. They don't demand to be heard. They simply move forward, softly, deliberately. I breathe differently now. Not out of panic, not out of habit, but out of rhythm. A rhythm I didn't choose, but one I've learned to trust. I speak differently now. Not to fill space, not to prove I'm still here, but to connect, to offer, to witness. I don't explain myself as much, not because I don't care, but because I've learned that some truths don't need translation. I don't reach for the past the way I used to. It's still there, still part of me, but it doesn't define me. I don't chase the future the way I used to. It's still coming, still unknown, but it doesn't scare me. I live in the middle now, in the breath between memory and possibility, in the pause between what was and what might be. I'm not who I was, and I'm not who I'll be. I'm who I am, right now, in this moment, in this silence. I've learned to sit with myself, not as a stranger, not as a project, but as a companion. I've learned to listen to the way my body speaks, to the way my thoughts move, to the way my emotions rise and fall, without needing to be fixed. I've learned to trust the quiet parts of me, the ones that don't shout, the ones that don't perform, the ones that simply are. I've learned to forgive the versions of me that didn't know how to stay, that ran, that hid, that broke. I've learned to honor the versions of me that stayed anyway, that endured, that softened, that changed. I've learned to love the version of me that exists now, not perfectly, not completely, but honestly. I've learned that becoming isn't a destination. It's a practice, a breath, a choice. I've learned that silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of space, of possibility, of truth. I've learned that staying was never about holding on. It was about letting go, in a way that felt like staying. I've learned that change doesn't always look like movement. Sometimes it looks like stillness, like breath, like presence. I've learned that I am Not broken. Not lost. Not unfinished. I am becoming. And that is enough. This is the new self. Not better. Not worse. Just real. And I'm learning to live here. I stayed. And I changed. And now I rest. Not because the journey is over, but because I've stopped running from it. I no longer need to explain why I stayed, why I didn't leave, why I let the silence in. I no longer need to prove that I survived, that I'm still here, that I'm still me, because I'm not the same, not untouched, not unshaken, but I am here, and that is enough. Closure isn't a door slamming shut. It's a window opening quietly. It's a breath you didn't know you were holding, finally released. It's not forgetting. It's remembering. Without pain. It's not erasing. It's rewriting. With softer ink. It's not silence as absence. It's silence as presence. As witness. As companion. I no longer fear the quiet. I walk with it. Sit with it. Let it speak. I no longer fear the change. I wear it. Like a second skin. Like a story I no longer need to hide. I no longer fear the past. It shaped me. But it doesn't own me. I no longer fear the future. It waits. But it doesn't define me. I no longer fear myself. Not the broken parts. Not the soft parts. Not the parts that stayed. When everything else left. I stayed. And I changed. And I'm still becoming. But for now, I rest. I let the silence hold me. Not as a threat, but as a home. I let the stillness surround me. Not as a prison, but as a pause. I let the memory breathe. Not as a wound, but as a witness. I let myself be. Not as I was. Not as I should be. But as I am. And that is closure. Not an ending, but a moment. A breath. A truth. I stayed. I changed. And I'm still here. Still listening. Still soft. Still strong. Still becoming.